We are live.
Da, 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 da. It's the first live stream, the first InStitches family live stream crochet party of 2020. That's such a big handle.
That's a long one.
Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope everybody's having a nice day so far. Mr. InStitches is saying he's been reading through the chat and you guys are all talking about all the projects you're working on. And that's just awesome. I've got one here. If I do have time, I might get a little bit of work done on it. It's just one of my whips. But we thought we'd talk about patchwork today because we just launched our 2020 calendar blanket on Friday, and we've had some questions, and we've had some questions from the family members sort of about the project. And I noticed in the comments that a lot of you might be not only new to crochet, but even new to the concept of patchwork too. And patchwork is it's a real, I don't want to say addiction. I love patchwork and I've loved it for a long time. So because it sort of has a very special place in my heart, I thought it would be kind of neat to talk about patchwork, a little bit about its history, kind of how you can use it, ways you can think about it. I've got a whole stack of examples here, and I thought I'd go through some of that today and just give you an idea of like what you can expect and what you can try out, and maybe just give you a little bit of inspiration as you're planning out the color schemes and going forward as we work on our 2020 blanket.
Shell says a passion.
Yes, that's it. Thank you, Shell.
That's the word you're looking for.
Yes, it's a passion.
Yeah.
I love to sew. I learned how to sew before I learned anything else, and I got very excited about patchwork very early on. I mean, quilts are kind of a thing I think a lot of us have sort of seen. It was definitely something that our grandmothers did. Especially during the 1930s in the Depression, because every little scrap of fabric had to be used. You didn't want to let anything go to waste. But patchwork is really old. They found examples of pieced fabric work in Egyptian tombs and in Chinese tombs. And according to some of the things I've read, some of these pieces are around 5,000 years old. So that is old. That means people have been hoarding scraps of fabric and using up every last little piece for a long time.
Imagine having to bust through that stash. That's 5,000 years old. Like,
you'd worry that it might
I'm really struggling busting through this stash. You can't do it in 5,000 years.
No. There's a lot of different kinds of patchwork. So some of you might be familiar with the more traditional looking patchwork shapes. Some of these patterns have actual names because they've been around a long time. And a lot of the traditional patchwork blocks that we kind of think of when we think of quilting, they got really popular, especially in the 30s, because it was the Depression. People were trying to use up everything they had. And there were more people kind of involved with it as not just a pastime, but a good way to use up those scraps. You've probably seen crazy quilts or crazy patchwork. That was something that got really popular in the Victorian era when sort of middle-class families were starting to get access to finer fabrics like silks and velvets and stuff. And they would have dresses made and they'd have, curtains made. And they didn't want to let go of those little odds and sods because they were quite expensive. So they would work them all into crazy patchwork. I actually have an example of that. Tell me if that looks okay, Mr. InStitches.
Yes, it looks great.
Okay.
You can hold it. You don't have to hold it so close.
There
you go. Yep.
Crazy patchwork, obviously for a reason. There are no distinct patterns. The shapes are just whatever little pieces were left. They're all kind of sewn together any way that they'll fit. And then to cover up some of that, those seams, there's all this fancy embroidery and stitching over it. So this got to be really popular in the Victorian era. This is actually from that time. This was made in or around 1901. And it's all silks and really pretty pieces of fabric. There's a little bit of lace in there. So that's an old example of crazy patchwork. That got a real resurgence in the 60s and 70s when people were sort of starting to break away from traditional looking clothing, sort of the starched upright looks of the 1950s, and they were going for basically as far away from that as they could. And so people started to make a lot of patchwork clothing, a lot of patchwork decor. It really, if you look back at sort of 1970s Good Housekeeping magazines, you'll see patchwork figure quite prominently in those photographs because it was just by that point, it's just trendy and it was cute. But it had started kind of more as a counterculture thing in the 60s. So patchwork has a long history and it's had multiple resurgences, and there's sort of the strict quilting look, and then there's the crazy quilting look. You can go with a very specific color palette. You can just mix any colors you have together, especially if you're just using up whatever you have left. So anything goes in patchwork, which I think is probably another one of the reasons that I like it so much. I've got some patchwork clothing I want to show you too. A lot of you have probably seen a couple of these. So I like to make patchwork skirts. Again, it's that 1960s thing. This is one I made myself. It's just squares. So it's just squares and rectangles sort of sewn together, 3 different tiers, and each tier is longer than the last one. So you get a little bit of a gathering effect, and it has a little bit of a square dance look to it. I love skirts like that. I think they're really cute. And these were just such sweet little patterns. There's a pattern with a whole bunch of buttons. This is frogs. This is some old fabric I think I got from my grandmother. And I liked those colors, but they were odd, and I didn't have enough to make a very specific big project out of. So it's another reason that scrap work is great. You can take a bunch of things that are similar colored and then mix them all into a single big project. I have another skirt. Some of you have probably seen this one. It's a lot bigger. It's lined, so it's quite thick. It's much longer. Same thing. It's just a bunch of squares all stitched together. And there's multiple tiers to that. And I made a purse to match. I think I've got that down here somewhere. Here it is. So this is fun. Some of the fabric that's actually used in this patchwork is patchy looking itself. So it just sort of lends more to that patchy concept. It's a big pocket. So it's a hanging purse pocket. I've got some buttons here to sort of close it up. And then the idea is that I just tie it around my waist with these long ties. And I've got a little pocket that hangs at the side of my waist. Hanging pocket purses, so little pocket purses that you would tie around your waist, were also very popular at the turn of the last century, so like the late 1800s. There are sort of lots of examples in museums of little, what they call hanging pockets or ladies' pockets. And they were, again, made out of scraps in a very kind of patchwork sort of style. They were made to tie around the waist or button onto or tie onto a belt. And ladies who were going to market would often wear sort of one of these around their waist. And it was nice. It was kind of a very handy place to keep like your change and your money and whatever else you kind of needed to keep on you without having a great big sort of shoulder bag. Kept your hands free too. So a couple of wearable options, wearable examples of patchwork. And that's just very basic patchwork. It's just rectangles and squares. You can get into the much more interesting patchwork. I've got some examples of that too.
There's more.
There's more. I've got lots and lots.
You've got quite a pile there. I
do. So some that I know the names of, some that I'd have to look up because I'm not. I love patchwork, but I don't know all the terminology. I do know, however, that this is a Dresden plate. The idea of a Dresden plate is all these little tiny sort of sunburst-looking pieces that are all pointed on the end, a bit like a picket fence, but they all taper in and then they go around a circle. The Dresden plate is like a little more complicated. I kind of stitched it on by over stitching it to a background piece. I haven't ever done anything with this. Actually, I used to sit in class and work on that before class started. I had these pieces going a while, but I know that's called a Dresden plate. What else have I got here? Oh, and I've got, so this is one called Bright Hopes. It's a square with rectangles that work around the outside of it. I added a little heart in the corner, but that particular pattern is called Bright Hopes. So it starts with a square and then rectangles go around it. You might see that pattern in patios, sometimes when they're laying patio stones. It's a similar kind of tessellating metric shaped, or what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say modular isn't the word, but shapes that are kind of like the square is 2 by 2, and so the rectangle is 2 by 4, and it's this sort of like perfect little math that works out the math makes the shapes fit together. I know there's a better word for that, but that one's called Bright Hopes. I love that. This is a basic, this is a mix of a 4-patch with so one patch is actually made of 3 strips. Actually, they're all made of 3 strips. So that's a 4-patch, but it's called a Roman patch, a Roman stripe. I'd have to look that up, but each block is three stripes, and then the stripes all turn as the 4 different squares are sewn together. I think it's called the Roman block, or the Roman 4-patch, something like that. That's another nifty little shape. Here's one that's just sort of a kind of a tree. So it's triangles that all tessellate together, and then there's extra squares and rectangles across the bottom, so you can get sort of a tree shape going. A lot of patchwork is just rectangles, squares, and triangles all kind of put together. I don't know the name of this one either, but I absolutely love it. It's made by first creating a square whose 4 center squares are split in half, and then triangles. So you have like a pinwheel. Middle one is like a pinwheel, but then you add a triangle to each of its corners.
That would really pop.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So that's a pinwheel inside a square. Here's just a big version of a pinwheel. That's another really pretty one. So that one's called the pinwheel. It's basically 4 squares split in half, and then you swap out the triangles. So you swap out each half and you spin them together.
Al really likes the pinwheel.
I love the pinwheel too. It's really pretty. What else have I got here? Okay, here's another one. I don't know the actual name of this. This is where you start getting into different versions of stars. So there's a lot of different patterns that become stars or are sort of a play on a star theme. And it's mainly just you get sort of neat little angles by creating, sort of cutting apart your triangles and cutting apart your rectangles and then adding them in with squares. There's a lot of math in patchwork.
Ooh,
don't worry though, we're not going to make you do any
one.
math this
Fancy.
year. I like that one. That's kind of a version of a star.
Yeah.
Here's another really pretty one. Again, I don't know the name of it, but it's also sort of squares and triangles. Like if I turn it this way, you can really see like there's the center square, and then there's squares that are made up by 4 triangles that are kind of on either side of it, and then triangles in between. So just
it's like one of those visual puzzles where you can see.
Here's a plainer version of that star. I can't remember. This is something star, but I don't remember the actual name of the star. But that one's
Ninja Star.
Ninja Star. That's exactly what it looks like.
That's what I see.
For sure. I love that one too. Another one that I think is so pretty, I don't know the name of. I did a lot of these. This is going to sound funny, but I have a bunch of girlfriends at work who are very crafty. And for a little while, we thought we would get into quilting. And we used to just sort of do like a little crafty thing on Fridays at lunch. And one of the girls is quilt obsessed. And I can really use that word for her because she just can't get enough. She's got yarn or I should say she's got fabric and quilt packages like I've got yarn. Only I think she's got me beat.
This is cute.
So she brought one of her sewing machines to work, and we actually just sat there and did patchwork at lunch. It was hilarious.
Oh, a few people mentioning that they also quilt. Quilted before learning crochet. Oh, that's a pretty one.
That's cute, eh? Yes, I quilted before I learned crochet too.
Jacqueline's mom teaches quilting classes at the local Joann's.
I love it.
You would love to.
I would love that.
Love to sit in on that session. Eh?
Here's a much fancier square that I made. So this is made by creating 3 strips of just flying geese. So flying geese is triangles that are all kind of heading in the same direction. And then they're kind of made to look like evergreen trees. And then the image of a tent is embroidered, like sort of patched on top of it. So the tent is actually its own thing, and I've stitched it on over top of it. I really like that square because I love camping and I love the great outdoors. So I think that one's really cute.
I love that the frogs are the campers.
Yes, those are frogs.
The frogs, they're all camping. They're like chilling out on the beach. They're sunbathing, maybe playing some volleyball.
So you can go from the very simple in patchwork to the very complicated. And then, of course, you can add stuff on top of it like appliques and embroidery. So we're not going to get that crazy this year, but I wanted to show you some nifty examples of stuff, especially some of the things that I've done, just to kind of get your inspiration going. I've also got a couple of other little things here. So what have we got? This is, some of these are just fun. So there's this is my own version of some sort of random patchwork or random piecework. So it's pieces that are folded and then sewn down onto a plain, in this case, just a plain square, to look like a bird. So I kind of had a bunch of leftover pieces, and I was playing around by folding them in different directions and then putting them all together to see what kind of a shape I got. And I got something that I thought looked a bit like a bird. And then I added some embroidery and stuff on it. I even crocheted him some feet. So I like that. A lot of these, they're just squares. I haven't actually worked them into a final project yet. I have got a couple of little ones. So this one I like. It's just a little patch. It's the moon, and I've embroidered some little leaves, a bit of vine, sort of like you're looking through a tree or a bush at the full moon. Also, just some small little scraps that I had that I didn't want to throw away. And what's this one? Well, this is another one I was working on. So again, you're going to see a big theme with me. In my patchwork, I love outdoor scenes. So there's a woodsy outdoor scene.
Oh, that looks great. That looks like a window.
Yeah, isn't that cute? None of this has been worked into any final pieces, but when I was a lot younger, I used to like to just paint with fabric. And here is sort of a functional piece, another functional piece of patchwork. So I made a little square, and it's another Bright Hopes shape. So it's the Bright Hopes pattern, which is the square with the rectangles kind of going around it. And I turned it into, I lined it, backed it, and turned it into a drawstring sack. And I made a whole bunch of these, and I've been sort of using them as gift bags whenever I was short a gift bag. But I had just a little tiny gift to give out, because they're kind of, that's another neat thing about patchwork. You don't have to make a gigantic project. One of you mentioned in the comment section on our patchwork square pattern that you were going to make a few extras and make cushions out of them. And since they're 12-inch squares, that sets you up to cover like a standard pillow form. And if you had to just like add an extra little row of border, of double crochet border or something around the outside, you could if you needed to make it up a little bigger. And they're relatively thick. I just happen to have them right here. So that's the crochet. That's the 9 patch we did on Friday. And it would be a perfect little throw cushion. You could have a couple of them put together. So if you wanted to make extra ones, or if you're like me and you just could not decide what color way to use for the January square.
We have our first super chat of the year.
Oh my gosh.
This is from Julie.
Hi, Julie. Thank you.
Julie says, no question, just love to you.
Thank you so much. Take the opportunity to have a little sip of tea. So yeah, I think this is quickly turning into my favorite. So I have a hunch that this year I might, spoilers. No spoilers. No, I'm not spoiling.
No spoilers.
No, if you guys were with us when we did the 2017 blanket, you know that I always had at least one other version of the month square to show before we made one.
Elle's using our emojis to create art in the chat.
Cool. So I wound up having at least 2. I had enough squares from the 2017 blanket project to make 2 blankets, which I did. And I still had some left over. And because I just love making squares, I think making modular pieces to turn into a bigger project is what, again, because I love patchwork. It's one of my favorite things to do because it's working on something small that can be a part of a bigger picture. So because I wanted to show you all the different ways the 9 patch can look, I made up a few, and now I'm thinking to myself that I can't honestly decide. I don't even know yet which one I would use as my January block. So I'll probably be making a few versions of this blanket for myself, just so I, A, use up all my squares, and B, I get the chance to sort of try them all out together and see what I like. So I love that one. I love that one. Oh, I love that one. And then that was the other version you could do with the 9 patch is to make all of the middle and like squares all the same color, and you get sort of a really cool cross effect going. Yeah.
If anyone wants to watch that video or do the crochet along this year's blanket, I'm going to link it in the chat.
Perfect.
So that's the 9 patch, the one Jayda's showing right now.
Yes. All right. So I'm going to keep those handy.
Thank you, Elle. Elle's giving us all kinds of compliments.
Thanks, Elle. Yeah, so anyway, I thought now we would I've shown you guys some patchwork examples. Patchwork can be anything. So if you have never experimented with patchwork, either with fabric or with yarn, then you might want to explore that this year. So if you're still looking for like a 2020 challenge, then you might want to give experimenting with patchwork a try. You can be super structured like we're going to be with the patchwork blanket, or you can do some crazy stuff. Are you coming in?
I'm going to come say hello. Are you done showing these?
That's my clothes. You can just toss them over there, like I do with my clothes usually.
Hi, everyone.
Wearing your nice shirt today.
Yeah,
I like that. Actually, that's really nice. That's warm.
It's nice and polished.
I should have worn a warm jacket. It's kind of chilly.
I have to suck in. Yeah. keep the belly back. All right, I'm going back to my post.
Thank you for saying hello. Yeah, so we thought we would talk a little bit about the project and answer some of the frequently asked questions that popped up since Friday. And I've broken them down into some sections so that we will hopefully try and cover everything. I'm going to start with the hook and the yarn because there were some questions about that. I'm using a 5.5 millimeter hook. That's also known as an I or a 9 in the US or a size 5 in the UK. And I am using that hook because I feel that it works best with the worsted weight or medium weight size 4 yarn that I'm using. Most of the yarn that I'm using is Super Saver by Red Heart, Premium or Super Value by Bernat, or the Mary Maxim plain old medium acrylic yarn. I'm going to mix them all together because they all are very much the same weight category. There might be a little bit of Red Heart Comfort thrown in there. Sometimes Comfort can be a little thicker than the average size 4, but it will still play nice with everybody else. So that's the yarn I'm using. I know a lot of you ask from, especially the UK, if I can give sort of yarn equivalents in UK, like if it's, is it DK, is it Aran? And I have to say, a lot of the yarn that we use here, this acrylic stuff, is a size 4 medium weight yarn. It's called worsted in some cases, but it's a little thicker than a DK and a little thinner than an Aran. So DK is always a little bit lighter. DK is more like a size 3 or a baby weight or sport weight yarn in my mind. And the Aran yarn is almost like a size 5, what used to be called chunky and is now called bulky weight. So Aran is a little thicker, DK is a little thinner. If you're using all DK weight yarn, then you might want to use the 5 millimeter hook. So it's just a half hook size down from the one that I'm using, but that will size a little nicer with the DK weight yarn. Your squares will not be 12 inches or 30 centimeters. They'll probably be a little bit smaller than that, but that's not a big deal. There are 2 ways you can, alleviate the sizing differences if you're using a DK or a lighter weight yarn. You can add a second row of border. So you just go around with the same border color and you double crochet in every stitch and you do the same little thing in the corners, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. So you double crochet in every single stitch around. So you can do 2 rows of the border and that will size it back up. Or you can just make them all exactly the way we're doing. They'll be a little bit smaller. And when you get them all together at the end of the year, you can just add a few extra rows of border if you want to make your blanket a bit bigger. So it's entirely up to you.
The chart that we have on our website on the tools page, does that help with the
yarn?
The sizing, like UK versus?
I don't think we have a yarn chart. We've got a hook chart.
We have the hook chart. We don't have the yarn.
We've got terminology. We've got UK and US terminology, but we don't have a yarn breakdown yet. I do have that information.
I guess we'll work on that.
We should probably do that.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, so if you are using DK weight yarn, then you might want to use a size 5 hook with it, just so that your stitches don't look too loose or too wide apart. I always encourage you, though, to make samplers. So if you've got yarn and you've got your hooks and you're not really sure, it's always a good idea to work up a little sampler. That way you can say, oh, you know what, my stitching's really tight. I need to use a bigger hook to loosen up my stitches. Or my stitching is really loose. I should probably use a smaller hook to sort of make my stitches look a little neater. If you make up a quick little sampler, and I would say in this case, a great sample block would be to work one of these blocks. So one of the little patches, which is 12 stitches by 6 rows in double crochet. And just work that, take a look at it, measure it. Each of these patches will be a little less than 4 inches or 10 centimeters. So it should be 10 centimeters or 4 inches, or just under that, I should say. So a little bit less than that. Remember, when we get them all together, blankets stretch a bit, so you'll get a little bit of extra sizing because the weight of the blanket will stretch it out. And you can also block your blankets. You don't have to. If you're giving it as a gift, it's always a nice thing to sort of make it all lie nice and flat. But you can also just let it be, and then the first time you wash it, it will kind of naturally block itself. So don't stress the sizing too much. If you have a special size in mind because you want to lay it on a bed or something, you can always add extra border to these squares if you want. You can add the extra border to the individual squares as long as it's the same color. Or you can add extra border to the whole blanket at the end, or you can do both. So definitely flexibility in this project because it's a square a month. Which brings me to the next question. A lot of people were kind of confused by whether or not we would just be using the same 9-patch concept and just changing up the colors every month. Nope. January was the 9-patch. The 9-patch is 9 squares. So it's a square that's made of 9 squares. So every month we're going to explore a different classic, probably familiar looking patchwork design, and we're going to crochet it, obviously. We're striving for no sewing this year because we did a lot of sewing in the blanket last year. So we're
sewing.
I love sewing. But yeah, we want to explore different techniques and stuff this year. And one of the techniques we're going to be using a lot is the join as you go because and it's a simple join as you go. It's a slip stitch join as you go. It's really handy if you're just working join as you go granny squares together. And we thought it would be fun to sort of demonstrate it in other uses for other shapes as well. That way you don't have to worry about sewing. A lot of you were having some difficulty with the slip stitch joins, or maybe you don't quite trust your own abilities yet. First of all, this isn't hard. And it's not easy. It just is. So don't stress it out. Don't make it something bigger in your head than it really is. Just make it work. So if you don't like the slip stitch join, or you find it's not working out for you, or you feel uncomfortable with it, you are more than welcome to do whip stitching. So grab your yarn needle and a bit of yarn and just sew your pieces together if that is more comfortable for you. There are really no rules here. We're having fun and we're using up our scraps. We're also really excited about it being a scrap-focused project this year. And we're going to talk about colors in a second, because I know a lot of you had the challenge to use up your stash this year. And a couple of years ago, my personal challenge was to use up the yarn that I had and not buy any. So I did a no-buy yarn in, I think it was 2018. I didn't buy any yarn, which was tough because buying yarn is one of my favorite things. But I struggled through, and everything we made in 2018, I made using the yarn I already had. And I have to say, at the end of the year, it didn't really look like I'd put a big dent. I think I had a lot more yarn than I thought. I also have a lot of really big balls of yarn, and we did a lot of smaller projects. So I was only using up bits and pieces of certain balls that I had lying around. So that was a fun challenge. Is it lunch?
Lunchtime. We got a super chat. This is from Mama V.
Mama V, thank you.
Mama V says, I'm working on my 4th square of the 9 block and ran out of the color I was using.
Ooh.
Should I tear out or add to the color to make it two-tone?
I will tell you 2 things that I would do here. So if you're a perfectionist, if you're going for a very specific color palette on this blanket, like let's say, you want to just use mauve and blue and gray and white. That's what you want to use. Fine. Then you might not be happy with a blanket that has a little bit of you might not be happy with a square that isn't perfect. If you don't mind the patchy look, if you aren't going for a specific, you can do one of 2 things. You can take out that patch and replace it with one that's a very similar color. You can tie in a very similar color and just finish off the patch, especially if there's only like a couple of rows left. Or you can just make that a multicolor patch, like my crazy one here. And if you are still kind of alternating where the squares go, it will still look like a 9 patch. So try not to if you're using multiple colors, try not to put like 2 of the same color next to each other, unless you like the way that looks. So for example, if you did all of the outside squares the same color and then the inside square a different color, you'd have a square and a square. That's one I didn't do. Gosh, there's so many different ways you can vary up the colors. Another square, I'm gonna have to make another one. So it depends on your personal preferences. So if you're really, you know, picky about that looking a certain way, then you might want to take it all out and do it in colors that you know, like they're all going to be perfect. But if you don't mind the scrappy look, just tie in a ball of yarn that's similar or even different. Why not? I would have done all of them, I think, just to see what like I would do. So this one, I like it that it's perfect. There's an even number of like the blue and the pink was the look I was going for. I love that that looks that way. But in the case of a 9 patch that's just like I'm using up whatever I have, even if I was halfway through this orange block and I ran out and I thought, oh, I'll just tie in like a different shade of orange, that might look really cool. So you have like a couple shades of orange there, maybe a couple of shades of green in this one, you know, just using up your scraps. It'll still be the patches of color, but they'll be like monochromatic. Oh, I think that would look amazing too. Experiment. That's exactly what this year is all about, experimenting. So I hope that helped a bit. I will talk a little bit more about color in a second. I think, did I finish with the hooks and the hook sizing? Yeah, I think I did. The yarn, so if depending on the yarn you're using, you know, you want to do some experiments to see which hook size works best with it. I think I covered that pretty much. Yeah, I did. I covered that exactly the way I feel it should be covered. So I'm using a 5.5 millimeter throughout. That's the other thing. Whatever blanket, so whatever size of hook you start with and whatever yarn you start with. So if you start with an acrylic DK or an acrylic size 4 medium or a wool Aran or something, stick with the same yarn throughout. So the same size of yarn, the same weight category, and the same fiber content, because it's one project and that whole project has to be made out of the same stuff. And stick to the same hook size too. That way you can be better assured that your squares will size up. Excuse me. There might be some size differences, so don't freak out. If you see, like, you make a square and you're like, you measure it and it's like 12 inches and it's perfect, and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna make another one, and you make another one and you use completely different yarn, but you still use the same hook, and you find out that it's smaller or bigger, don't worry about it. A couple things may have happened. Now you know the pattern, so you're, you know, busting along and your tension has loosened out. So maybe you end up with a bigger square, or maybe you were really excited and in a real rush, and so your tension tightened up a bit, so you end up with a smaller square. The yarn you're using, even though it says it's the same weight category, you know, it could just be a little bit smaller or a little bit thicker. So that could be. The blocking will size things out. So you don't have to block your squares before we put them all together. But if you want to, you can, especially if you're like a perfectionist and you want to see all of those even edges lining up and matching up before you get them all sewn together. You're more than welcome to do that. Take a sip of tea.
Lunch is ready. We have a super chat from Luann.
Thank you, Luann.
Luann says, I made it. Love your show.
Yay. Thank you for coming. I know it's and we kind of move it around because we have these, there's a few things, mitigating factors when we have a live chat. 1, are we both here? 2, do we have the time? 3, how are the squirrels appeased? Because if the internet is squirrely or there's a great big windstorm or a snowstorm sort of like raging out there, then we're never really sure if that's going to affect it. Excuse me. So yeah, sizing. Don't worry about the sizing. Your squares will all be roughly 12 inches or 30 centimeters, give or take a few centimeters. So if it's a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, and they all kind of like, you know, aren't all absolutely exact, don't worry about it. That is so normal. That happens all the time, even when you're making granny squares. Sometimes some are big, some are small. But if, as long as the stitch count, so you want to pay attention to the stitch count, as long as your stitch count is correct, everything will be fine. So don't worry about the sizing too much. It'll all work out. And that's what blocking is for, and that's what, you know, little cheats are for. If you find that something is super, super small, then go back and check your counts, because there shouldn't be more than a few centimeters of difference in the sizes between your squares if you're using the same hook every time and you're using the same weight of yarn. So that's something to keep in mind. Somebody asked a question about, a couple people actually asked about assembly. We are going to join all the squares together at the end of the year. So you don't have to join them up as you go, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, once you get all of your squares made, you may want to put them in a different order. It's entirely up to you. It's going to be your blanket. They don't absolutely have to go January, February, March, April, May, June, etc., etc., etc. You can put them in whatever order you like, and this is especially important for everybody who's just using up their scraps. So you might find, you know, I did 2 squares that kind of had like a pink and blue thing going on. I think I want to balance the blanket by putting like one up here and one down there. It's all up to you. So you can decide how you want to put your squares together at the end. You can put them together in order. And if you know exactly what color palette you're going for, then you can sew them together or stitch them together as you go. It's up to you. So don't stress the assembly too much. We're not going to make it complicated or crazy. And I'm planning to do it at the end of the year. So if you want to just do it at the end of the year along with me, then that's the plan. And somebody asked about, again, the question was, do we have to make a bunch? You know, is it the same pattern repeating? Nope, January is a 9 patch, and every month will be a different quilt block design, and each one will be a surprise, because we love to do that around here. So that is basically the concept of this year's blanket. It's designed so that you can use up your scrap yarn. You don't have to buy more. It's going to be kind of a neat trip down patchwork, into the patchwork realm. And I love the geometric, that's the word I was looking for. I love the geometric designs in a lot of traditional quilt blocks. I love squares and triangles and the tessellating forms that you can get by splitting them and splitting them and combining them and switching them and changing up the colors. It's very satisfying. I find looking at geometric shapes all tessellating together very satisfying on some level. I don't know. So I've always wanted to do that in crochet form. So we were really excited about this year's blanket. I had a hard time keeping my mouth shut about what this year's blanket was going to be.
Are there any more questions that were from the family members?
No, it was mainly about color. Oh, another good one about graphs and the unified importance of a border. So like I said in the first video, you want to make all the borders on all of your squares the same color. So I'm using white, but you can use whatever color you feel goes best with the squares you're making. In fact, if you want, you can just make the base square and then add and wait till you have all the base squares made. And by base square, I mean the actual square without the border, the little white border. I'll continue in a second, I
guess. We got a sticker from Lynn.
Oh my, thank you, Lynn.
It's really cute. It's this, like, I don't know, pear-shaped cartoon, like giving a thumbs up. That's really fun. So cute. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
Just a big thumbs up from Lynn.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's cute. You're having your own party over there.
I'm having my own party over here. Oh, before you continue, lunchtime. We got a super chat from Honey.
Thank you, Honey.
Honey says, Jayda, your tutorials are so easy to follow.
Good. We're so glad to hear that. Yeah. Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much, you guys. Yeah, so the border, you can leave the border part off of all of your base squares until the very end, and then decide if there's a specific color that you feel you'd like to use more of, or that you have a lot of left over, then you can go back and border all of your squares. You could also border all of your squares like I have with a single color, and then if you felt like your squares weren't big enough, you could go back and reborder them all over again by adding another border row to them all with, again, the same color. So it doesn't have to be, like in this case, white. You might want to put on a border row of white and then maybe a border row of black. So there's a lot of different like fun patchy design things you can do with the colors. But it is very important that all of the borders are the same color. So whether you do them all as you go, like I've chosen white, or you wait till the end to border them all so that you kind of can pick a color that you feel goes best with all the squares. You want to make sure they're all bordered in the same color so that no matter what you've done, you have a unified looking blanket. So all of your squares have their border in common. It's a nice plain double crochet border in the same color. And that's what will make your blanket look planned and intentional.
And did you mention maybe don't join them till closer to the end of the year so you can you don't choose how you want it to look?
Yep, yeah, I had a whole thing on that. I guess
I'm reading in the chat, so I'm semi.
You're really good at tuning me out.
I'm semi distracted. I have a lot of practice. I've got a lot of practice at tuning you out.
Yes, do I talk constantly?
Keeps me out of the nut house.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. Also graphs. So we talked a little bit about making a graph, and we'll show you this again and again and again every month that we do a square. We'll show you the little graph design that you can sketch out and then color in. And in the case of something like this is part of the fun for me. You make a little graph. So you draw 3 squares by 3 squares. So you draw a square and then bisect it so that there's 3, 3, and 3. So a little 9-patch square. You draw yourself a little square, and then you grab your markers or your pencil crayons or your watercolors or whatever you might have lying around, and you just experiment. You know, use those colors to make different color patterns inside that square. Draw a whole bunch. You might want to do a little stash diving. So go over to your stash, take your crayons with you, and compare the crayon colors to the colors you have. And then you can get an even more sort of accurate idea of what that color is going to look like once they're all matched up together. And then keep your sketches. You want to put them together in a sweet little book, a little scrapbook, or a little journal or something. You know, tape them in, glue them in. You can stuff them into those little clear sleeves if you're using a scrapbook. Keep your sketches and your graphs because it becomes sort of part of the creation of this blanket, so that if you ever want to go back and do a 9-patch or do one of the other ones that we do, you'll have your graphs and you can sort of refer back to them and go, you know what, I really liked that particular color patterning, or I loved that one. I want to try it with a couple of different colors. And it's just fun, and it's wonderful to keep journals of the projects that we do, especially these year-long projects, because they're quite an investment of emotion and energy. And, you know, you're doing it along with a whole bunch of other people. I think that's one of the reasons I love the calendar blanket so much, is because we're all kind of working on it together in our own little way. And then at the end of the year, we've all done the same project, but they all look as unique as we are. So, so you might want to keep your graphs in a little book or a journal. Because it's nice to be able to look back at them. And December is quite a far way away. If you get to December and you're like, you know, I think I want to redo my January square, you can go back to your January graphs and take a look at them and decide, oh, I think I want to try that color sequence instead. So yeah, fun. I love that.
Oh, looks like we got another super chat here.
I'm almost out of tea.
Dinner time. This is from Jane.
Jane, thank you, Jane.
Jane says, hello from Pittsburgh. Enjoy your tutorials. Have done the baskets, totes for March. Your instructions are so easy to follow.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've done several baskets. I should actually show you guys. I've made 5 of those big, beautiful baskets. I've got one here that I made in mostly light colors. Obviously, they're all full of yarn. 2 of them are full of clothing. I've got all of my tights in one and all of my t-shirts and tank tops in another. And they're great organization in the closet. So that's one. And then I made this one. I love this one. Also full of yarn. And I used some neon colors that I had lying around. I just love it. I love how they all turn out. Doesn't matter what colors you match together. It always turns out looking so cool. Mm-hmm. So also full of yarn. But so I've got 2 in here full of yarn. I've got 2 in the closet full of clothes, and 1 that I made for Mama's new kittens so that they could have something to jump in and play in and keep all of their toys in. So that one I don't have any longer.
Oh, this is awesome.
There we go. Ta-da. Are there any questions, Mr. InStitches, regarding the blanket that maybe I didn't cover, or?
I have to go back through the chat a little bit because it had froze for a while.
Oh, we're still having problems with the chat.
Yeah, so there's a lot I missed. For the people that were asking about washing and blocking and all that, I linked a few tutorials we have. You can click those links to watch the videos. And someone asked, how much is it to be a family member? We have 4 tiers. It starts at $2 and it goes up from there.
And there's a button and a link you can click on, and there's all sorts of extra information in there.
Yeah, we have a video you can watch.
Yeah, there's a video.
And there's a bunch of information about how it works and all that.
And it's totally optional, so if you want to check it out, go ahead, but you don't have to sign in if you don't want to.
So we got while the chat was freezing, we got another super chat.
Oh, I'm glad you caught it.
Midnight snack. We're just working our way through the day here. This is from Laura.
Hi, Laura. Thank you.
So Laura says, I am going to be moving into a new home soon. I will be doing a farmhouse theme to decorate my new home. So this patchwork blanket will go perfectly with my home decor theme.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
I can't wait to get started.
Well, congratulations on the new home.
Yeah.
That is so exciting.
That's exciting.
Oh, and it's so nice to make yourself a blanket. It's like your own little homecoming gift. I think that's great. And you can sort of decide what colors you want to go with.
We've got a couple more super chats here.
Oh my goodness gracious. Thank you, guys.
The chat is kind of catching up. I think we had a bit of internet interruption. Yeah. So this is from I love who's line.
I love who's line.
I love who's line. I love who's online. I love.
Okay.
So thank you to I love.
Thank you.
I love says hello from Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland.
We love your work.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
And another one here from Shelley.
Must be the evening in Northern Ireland.
They'd be about 5 hours ahead of us.
Is that right?
Roughly 5 to 6.
I think we're Greenwich Mean Time -4.
So what time here? It's almost 2, so it'd be about 7 there.
7? Is that about right?
I'm guessing 7, 6, 7, 8.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
I love will let us know from across the pond, right? So Shelley also super chatted us.
Thank you, Shelley.
And Shelley says, I love this project because I can make a patch in a little time each month and then go back to my other whips.
Yes, 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 yes. I agree. That's one of the reasons I love the square a month. I had so much fun doing the 2017 squares. I've loved all the blankets we've done so far. I think they're so much fun, but I especially love scrap-based projects and very modular. Whose line?
Whose line is it?
Whose line?
Is that what the name is? Like a show, like the show? Whose line is it anyway? I don't know. I'm just reading chat here. I'm talking out loud.
Yeah, I love modular stuff. So this one you can even take to work and work on it, and it's a lot more mobile than last year's blanket. So we had to change it up a little bit.
Yes. Whose line is it anyway? I'll guess it.
I loved that show. That was so funny.
That was amazing.
That show is great. I love improv. It makes me laugh. I love this one too. I can't decide. I don't know. I'm 4 squares. I've made 4 versions of the January block. I literally thought of a few more that might look cool, and I can't even decide which one I would use.
Dun, dun, dun.
A lot of blankets I'm making this year.
There's going to be 300 blankets over here this year.
There is. I just wanted to quickly go through my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. But if
what about someone had a question at the beginning of the live stream that was regarding I don't know, you may have answered this, but it was they had made 2 squares of the patchwork blanket and each one came out completely different.
Yes.
So one like different, like not the right shape, not the right size.
So not the right shape, not the okay. So they should be square. There should be square. They should be a block. If you find them, I did talk a little sizing. So if you find like one was a lot smaller, then make sure you check your stitch count because stitch count is very important in these patterns because the patterns are all based on a very specific stitch count, and the stitch count is going to be what helps ensure that all of our squares end up being the same size. So you want to make sure that your stitch count is correct. And if you're wondering what the individual patches, so the individual patches in the 9 patch are 12 stitches across, 6 rows tall. That's every individual patch. There's 36 double crochet stitches across the top of each side. So 36 and that's 144 altogether in the border. That's not including the little chain 2 spaces. So make sure your stitch counts are correct. If you use the same yarn from the same company and the same line but different colors, there definitely could have been a little bit of sizing differences. I will say that the Red Heart Super Saver Spring Green, it's that bright green. I've got a creeper here somewhere. It's that green color. Excuse me. I have a lot of it. I use a lot of it. Spring green. I really like it. It's very thin. So this particular yarn, even though it's a Red Heart Super Saver, it is so much thinner than all of its sisters. And it always works up a little bit smaller than everything else in the same sort of like brand category. Excuse me. So that could be it. There could be a little bit of weight sort of variation between your yarns, even though they all say, oh, it's size 4 and it's this and that. That's just industry wide, unfortunately. The other thing could be, especially if you use the same hook, so make sure you're using the same hook, your tension just swapped out. You were really relaxed the first time or really, really tight the first time. If you are relaxed, you have looser stitching. And if you're a little bit sort of like, excited or wound up, you might have tighter stitching. And if you have looser stitching, your square will be larger. If you have tighter stitching, your square will be smaller. And that's very common. So you are thinking your way through a pattern for the first time. So it might be a little, I find a lot with mittens and slippers and baby booties. You think your way through the pattern the first time and you get your booty or your mitten, or in this case, a square. And then you're more familiar with the pattern the second time. So you move a little quicker. And that one is always either a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger. It's just, I have yet to make 2 perfectly identical mittens or like booties. But so that may have been what happened. And if there's just a variance of a couple of centimeters, don't worry about it. The blocking will even it out. Just make sure that your same hook, same yarn weight, and the stitches. Make sure you count your stitches because the stitches are the most important part. They're the biggest indicator. But if there's a little bit of sizing difference, don't worry about it. I don't even think all of mine are perfect. Let me see here. Do a quality check. So there's 2 held together. So I can't see one on the other side of it. So they're pretty close. Yeah, I'd say those 2 are the same. What about these 2? So yeah, that first one feels a little bit bigger. So the blue and green one feels like it might be just a hair bigger than the purple or the blue and pink one. But that might be because I've fussed with this one a little bit more. Like I've laid it out, I've sort of stretched it out a little bit. I've held it more, so it's gotten warm in my hands and the fibers have loosened up a little bit. So there's any number of reasons that your squares could be slightly different shapes, but they should all be square.
One of the questions coming in is, what size will the final blanket be? Good
question. So the blanket squares are all roughly 12 inches across. There will be 12 of them, and there will be attached a 3x4 format. So 3 times 12 is 36, and 3 times 4 is 48. So the base blanket, before blocking, before any stretching that may occur, will be approximately 36 inches by 48 inches. You can make your blocks individually larger by adding an extra border row. So if you want them to be a little bit larger than 12 inches or 30 centimeters, you can do that. And then we'll be adding a border. And typically when we add borders to our blankets, we're just framing it. We're not doing anything insane. But of course, you are welcome to do whatever you want with your border. So if you want to add more sizing to your blanket and you want it over the 36 by 48, it'll probably be closer to, like, with the border, approaching 42 inches by probably 50 to 52 inches. That's where it'll be approaching before blocking, before any stretching. But if you want to put additional border on your blanket or your individual squares, then you can continue to make your blanket larger. But the base size will be approximately 36 by 48. Yeah. Ding, ding, ding. I'm all out of tea.
You're out of tea?
I'm out of tea.
I guess we'll have to wrap up
the
live
spill.
stream. Okay, one more super chat, and I guess then we can wrap it up.
I'll just double check my notes.
Unless you're done, unless you're not finished with the questions.
No, I think I finished the questions.
So this is from Roxanne.
Thank you, Roxanne.
Roxanne says, watch all your videos. You taught me Minion.
Oh, cool. I'm wondering, did you try the pattern that we have on our website. We have a free pattern over on our website. It doesn't have an accompanying video, but if you're comfortable working your way through our patterns, it's for a Bob the Minion. It's quite a bit bigger. I wrote that pattern up and made one for my girlfriend whose little guy was absolutely obsessed with Bob the Minion. And so we thought we'd share it with everybody. So there's a free pattern for
We are also obsessed with Bob
we
the
are.
Minion.
Yeah.
We love Despicable Me.
We do. So yeah, that pattern it makes for a fairly big minion,
Yeah.
and he even has a little teddy bear. That pattern even includes a little teddy bear.
And then we have a video tutorial. I guess that's the one.
We have a tutorial for a
about.
simple minion,
Yeah,
like a
little guy.
smaller one.
Yeah.
But if you want to try the bigger dude, we've got a pattern for that. And it's free over on our website. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Check it out.
If any of you haven't been to our website lately,
I'll link where all the free patterns are on our website.
Yeah.
Here.
We've been trying to sort of gradually refresh our website. We're sort of doing little tweaks and things here and there. And our workshop page, our pattern workshop page, is still. So if you're on a tablet or a mobile, I feel it necessary to tell you this. So if you're on a tablet or mobile and you go to our website, JaydaInStitches.com, you'll see a little like square at the top that's got some lines on it. If you click on that, that's where all of our individual pages are listed. So you can go to the pattern workshop page or the blog page or any of that stuff. That's where they're all sort of like contained. It's sort of in this little, it's a weird little option that the mobile version does. But if you go to the website on a computer or a laptop, you'll see all those pattern pages spelt out right across the top of every page. And so you can just sort of go to whatever page you want to. But the pattern workshop page, scroll down, down and down and down and down and keep going and keep going. We've got quite a number of patterns on there. They're all free. Most of them have a tutorial to go with them. So if you're learning how to read a pattern, it's a great resource because you can just print it off and sort of like put it down next to you and go to the tutorial and then follow along with the pattern and the tutorial. And
and for those of you that aren't aware, a lot of you are, but a lot of you are not. Whenever you're watching a video tutorial on YouTube, whether it's ours or something else, you can always obviously pause, but you can also slow the video down.
Yeah.
There's a little option that'll to slow down the video
or speed it up, which is
hilarious. Or speed it up if you're really, really good at crochet or building shelves or something. That'd be funny. But anyway, I people aren't aware that you can do that, and that helps.
Yeah,
you can slow it down like a few frames.
In the video player, so the actual player where the video is playing,
where it is,
it's usually in the bottom right-hand corner of the actual player. So if you tap on the video and like you get that that line, that little button there.
There's three dots.
There's like a little thing at the far right side. It's like 3 dots or whatever it is right now. They keep changing it. If you click on that, you'll be able to change the size of the video player, the speed of the video player. You have like a bunch of fun little options there. So if you're still kind of familiarizing yourself with all the cool things that the YouTube platform, can do for you, then you can give that a try. You can super slow down a video.
Yeah, and it helps,
or super
especially if you're learning.
Yeah.
Elle is insisting we do a bunny rabbit patchwork square for this blanket.
Oh my gosh.
Do you think we can?
Well, of course it's possible, but we've already got all the patterns picked out for the year.
Yeah, we've already kind of set the year up.
But you know what?
But we do. What about the bunny square? We have a bunny square 2017 blanket.
Yeah, we do. We've got a bunny square for that. Do I have that blanket around here somewhere?
I don't know.
I don't know. It might be in a different. I don't know if it's tucked away. Might be in the closet.
In the closet.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a bunny. It's a 12 square. It might actually.
I'm sure Elle's aware of that one.
It might actually fit. No, it's a different stitch count.
You think it would
fit? It's a different stitch count. No, it's the same size, but it's a different stitch count.
I've got a super chat here to get to.
But I'm gonna write it down, Elle, because bunnies, right?
Because bunny.
Because bunnies. Bunny patchwork.
Super chat here from Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Michelle says, I'm so happy to say hello to you all. Lots of hearts.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I guess if that was all the questions, and remember, guys, you can feel free to leave if you have questions about any of the individual blanket square patterns that we're doing this year. Leave them in the comment section on that video, and we will get to them. Sometimes there's a few days probably between you leaving the comment and me getting back to it, but we do go through all of them. So if you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and we'll get to them. And also, if you have arrived and you see there's quite a lot of comments there, sort of scroll through them, because my gosh, you guys are the coolest community ever. You leave such great comments and suggestions and helpful tips for each other.
And thank you to everyone that replies to other people's comments.
Yes,
like if
yes,
you know
yes.
the answer to something and you
Yeah.
happen to be there, like feel free to go ahead and reply to people, because it just makes the community
And there are just some adorable
more
threads
knowledgeable
too, like people kind of talking with each other about stuff and sharing ideas and color palettes. A few of you have decided to do variations on the birthstone colors for every month's square, which I think is awesome. I've seen that come up a couple times in the different calendar blankets, especially when we're doing sort of a monthly edition, and I love that. And I think that if you had the yarn, I mean, if you want to go buy it, perfect, but if you had the yarn, it would be so cool to do every single square sort of monochromatic shades of a birthstone color. So for example, like May is emerald, you could do like the May square monochromatic shades of green. I love green. I've got lots of that. And they would just look so cool. So yeah, everybody's sharing their ideas and their thoughts, and it's just wonderful. I love it.
We've got a super chat and a new member.
Oh, yay! Oh my goodness.
So first, the super chat. Thank you to Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Stephanie says, I want to thank you for inspiring me and many others on learning how to crochet.
Aww.
I am now attempting to teach my 18-year-old on how to crochet.
Awesome. Oh my gosh,
fantastic.
That's wonderful.
And a big welcome to Sue B.
Hi, Sue B.
Sue B joined
Thank
the
you.
InStitches family.
Welcome to the family.
Yeah, welcome.
That's wonderful. Guys, you guys are so great. Thank you so much, all of you, for finding the time to sit with us today. Like I said, if you've got questions about the blanket, feel free to leave them under the square itself, that particular video, because we do get to them and we will answer you back. And yeah, have fun. Experiment with colors. Do some stash diving. I know some of you are cleaning up your craft rooms today. So if you find little balls of yarn that you've had stashed away, then pull them out. Oh, variegated. Before I forget, I want to talk about variegated yarn, which is, for anybody who doesn't know, it's multicolored yarn, not self-striping yarn, but like this stuff. So multicolored yarn, variegated. Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead and use variegated yarn in lieu of a solid color when you're making these patterns, because variegated yarn, that sort of, especially when the colors are very short and they come out really, really quickly, it mimics the patterning in little chintz cotton fabrics that people use when they're doing patchwork. So a lot of fabric swatches, and I'll show you, I got a couple here. Way to cut myself off. So there's an example of fabric that isn't a solid color. There's a cute little print on it, and variegated yarn will mimic prints. So if you wanted to do like some squares solid and some squares with a variegated, especially because that solid color is in the variegated colors, then you can definitely use your variegated yarns up on this project, because it'll look like you're using a patterned print. It's just, oh my gosh, there are just so many color options for this blanket. I'm freaking out. I love it. I love it. I love it. So yes, somebody had asked that, and I thought it was a great question, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned it. That yes, you can definitely use your variegated yarns.
And once again, if there's questions we didn't get to in the live chat, it is difficult to get to every single question and comment. Just leave them underneath one of our videos on YouTube.
Yeah, and
we will absolutely get to them.
Yes, thank you.
At that point. So
take care, everybody. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We will see you very soon. We're going to see you Friday. Today's Wednesday. So yeah, we'll see you in a couple days for our next video. It's going to have a sweet Valentine kind of a feeling to it, because we know that's coming up soon. My gosh, time just flies by.
Yes.
We're already almost finished January. Holy cow. So yeah, we'll see you guys for that on Friday. In the meantime, stay safe, stay crafty, especially if you're digging out from giant snowstorms. And stay cozy and stay warm, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much, you guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day and a great week.
Bye.
Bye.